Everyone, welcome to Christian's Questions, a project of the New Tolerance Campaign. Today I have a very good guest with me, Ashley Jacobs. Ashley has spent the last 20 plus years working to improve K-12 education as a board member of independent schools and education-based organizations before launching Parents Unite in 2021. Previously, Ashley worked for the Gillette Company and was an MBA admissions interview board member for Harvard Business School, where she interviewed and evaluated business school applicants. She received a BA from Brown University and was a four-year varsity athlete and captain of the women's varsity squash team. Ashley holds an MBA from HBS and lives in Boston with her husband and their four children. How are you today, Ashley?
I'm well, Christian. How are you?
Absolutely. Very impressive resume. So I know our conversation is going to be good. So before we get started on any of the nitty gritty, tell us about yourself and the mission of Parents Unite.
Parents Unite really is meant to ensure that K-12 independent schools promote a culture that values and prioritizes true diversity of thought, freedom of expression, and freedom of discourse. So independent schools have been around for a very long time. They are self-governed. And in theory, they should be the cream of the crop academically. And what we noticed over the past decade or so was that things started to get a little bit dicey. Schools started to wander out of their lane and get involved in activism and training kids to be social justice activists, as opposed to being independent thinking truth seekers. And so that was one of the problems we were trying to solve.
Yeah, indeed. So many people know vaguely about what is happening at school board meetings and in schools regarding indoctrination. Loudoun County is a very good example of this. But few people know the role that accreditation agencies have in pushing programs like DEI upon schools. Can you walk us through the role they play in this system?
Sure. So accreditation really is meant to be quality control. But how it works in the private school sphere is that you're assessed against your mission, which is vague and ambiguous. It's also a form of peer review because you're assessed by the very peers with whom you work and who you might have to assess their schools in the future. So you can already see that there's probably inherent conflict of interest. Now, because you're assessed against your mission, you're not really looking at outcomes. You're looking at, how clean is the building? Do you have a nurse? Are you doing what you say you're doing? If your mission says we train children who are going to be global citizens, are you doing all the things that equal that mission? But the one thing we found that really concerned us, that accrediting agencies had really changed their mission, and everything that they were doing was through a lens of equity and justice. So what that means is they would do every school would do a cycle every 10 years, and you do a detailed self-study. So you really kick the tires of your school. And then frankly, it's a great exercise, right? Because you get a chance to look with your administration and see what all the things are that you're doing well, where you need some work. So it causes a lot of good reflection. The visiting team then gets your self-study. They come on campus for a few days. They confirm or deny what you've said you've done or will do. But the thing that was so interesting we found is that every school would get the same recommendation. You need more DEI, right? Now, for some schools, if you're a social justice school and that's your mission, then yes, absolutely, you might need more DEI. But if you're not a social justice school, if you're a religious-based school, or if you're a school that's, very classically liberal and you don't need DEI and they're telling you you need DEI, the board feels that they need to listen to the accreditors lest they risk losing their accreditation status. And so it's this weird cycle where if the board members would say, you know what, that's not the school we are, and so we don't feel the need to beef up our DEI. So we're going to, assess our values and our mission and try to be the best school we can be to serve all the children we need to serve. But we're not going to basically subscribe to your political doctrine that you're asking us to do. But nobody's really willing to do that except for a very few schools.
And so many people believe that private schools are kind of like viable alternatives to the kind of things we're seeing in education right now to avoid indoctrination. But groups like the National Association of Independent Schools seem to challenge that narrative. So what can you tell us about that and how accreditation agencies may actually compromise what might be a good alternative under ideal circumstances, but what are not a good alternative now, private schools?
So NEIS is the membership organization, and you're not compelled to be a member, but schools do because they get advantages of resources, professional development, conferences, data about all the different schools in the universe. They used to do the accrediting. They broke that off. in 2017, I think. And actually, academically, independent schools are still strong. They really are. I think the bar has been lowered because the public schools have gotten so bad and they've de-leveled classes. And in the name of equity, they've lowered a lot of standards. I think for the most part, most independent schools, as bad as they might be, are still better than the public schools. So that's the first thing. I think the governance model of the private schools is such that in theory, it should be easy to change, right? Because you have a board of trustees, they should be aligned around the mission and they should really be doing what's in the best interests of the children. And because they write their own bylaws and they're self-governing, it shouldn't take a lot to move the needle, as opposed to having to vote in a school committee member and have everybody come to a meeting every week and listen to a bunch of people complain. It's a very efficient system if it works. But what you have is a board at most of these schools that's comprised of parents who have children at the school. So the incentive structure is to keep your mouth shut because you don't want to say anything that's going to upset anybody, because your kid might get a bad grade. It might hurt their chances to get into Harvard. You might get kicked off the board. I mean, the circumstances are scary for parents who speak up, because a school can just say, you know what, maybe this isn't a fit for you anymore. And that's true. It may not be, because maybe the school's mission changed since you've been there, but you didn't necessarily know it changed. So that's why it's tricky. But I do think the academics, if I'm comparing them to most public schools, they're still, for the most part, quite strong.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I mean, a lot of people have criticisms about Harvard, where your alma mater, and a lot of people, especially after the Felicity Huffman scandal, and then of course after how they've handled the October 7th situation. Do you believe that a lot of parents still see Harvard or Ivy Leagues in general as the creme de la creme, the place where their kids have to go to have a successful career, or has that waned over the years?
It's such a great question. I think there's a lot of parents at private schools who are status seekers. They go to private schools because they want the status, they want the network. Those are the people that will want their kids to go to the Ivy League schools, because I do believe that there is still cachet and status. I think a lot of international families also believe that there's a lot of status. But if you look at the academics, I just don't think they're as strong as they used to be. I think they've created cultures of sort of fear and intimidation. I don't think that the rigor is there anymore. I think the kids who go to those schools maybe are all very pre-professional and they're all building resumes. And so they're not really engaging in the classwork in a way that's challenging anybody, because everybody's afraid to say anything because you don't want to risk saying the wrong thing and offending, the kid who you might need to get a job from someday. So it's this weird system. We're seeing a resurgence in, sort of the traditional Ivy League families looking at schools maybe in the South, right? So there was an article, I think recently, it was Forbes or Fortune, that profiled 10 other schools that have become, bigger destinations for families. It was like, Duke and BC and Georgetown and maybe Notre Dame and some other public universities. But I think people realize that there are more alternatives. I think as long as employers are hiring from a broader pool of schools, you're going to see more families be able to take the risk. But at the end of the day, these parents are still really bought into the whole Ivy League thing. It's
Mhm.
it's a thing. It
Yeah,
is.
interesting, interesting. Yeah, I wondered about that. So, Parents Unite, actually, this is some relevant news, actually recently joined in with a new tolerance campaign with our organization on an amicus brief in the Turpin versus Latin case, a case in North Carolina about the extent to which parents, the Turpins, are able to have a say in their child education at a private school, which was, in this case, the Charlotte Latin School. Can you explain to the audience how you joined this amicus brief and why?
Well, we joined it because we have a fundamental issue with the fact that parents have no rights at their schools. Now, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because having been involved in private schools as long as I have, there are some parents who are just difficult, right? And I think that historically, the pendulum was that there were parents that maybe had too much control, right? And if you were a wealthy donor, you had a direct line to the head of school and you were very influential and you could influence policy. And I don't think that's the right answer, right? But I think in response to that, the pendulum swung so far the other way that it became, it used to be parents were partners and collaborated, but it became very adversarial. And if a parent had a concern or a question or something didn't seem right, there was really no vehicle to express concern in a way that was helpful, and that could make the positive change, right? It was just that the heads of schools couldn't deal. And so they kick kids out or kick parents out if you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, or I don't know all the details of the Turbans case, but clearly there was a misalignment between their ability to parent their children the way they wanted to, and the school saying, no, that's not how it goes here. And sadly, that is their right as a school. And when you sign your enrollment contract, you're essentially signing over all your rights. And as a parent, you need to know that. But that's also how you get these scary environments at these schools where everybody's walking on eggshells, afraid to say anything. You get chilled speech, you get compelled speech, and it's not a healthy environment. And so somehow we have to get back to the middle where people can openly disagree, challenge policies in ways that are constructive. And that's going to involve boards adding some viewpoint diversity, which right now I don't think many of them have. That's part of the problem.
Indeed, indeed. So, in your experience on the ground level, how are parents driving awareness of how accreditation standards impact the educational experiences of students?
I don't think parents know or care. I think parents, it's funny
Wow.
because the brands are strong, right? Like you send your kid to these private schools and you just trust that they know what they're doing. And most parents are not educators. But again, these schools have been around for a long time. The children matriculate to great colleges. So they think, well, so and so goes there. It must be a great school. But most parents, if you talk to them about accreditation, they have no idea what you're talking about. And frankly, they don't care. And also in every state, there's a different rule about accreditation. Not every state requires it. It's like a gold star, right? It means you've done something that some people think is important. But I don't think parents even choose a school based on accreditation, and half of them don't know what it means, who accredits them, and why they even have it. So that's just one of these things where we're sort of nerds and we like are digging deep into sort of the why and the how we got here. And that's the rabbit hole we went down to really try to understand how these schools got so co-opted and sort of lost their way.
Yeah, no, and I want your thoughts on this. From what I see, the flaw in like accreditation as like an institution is that all institutions are made up of people, and you're expecting people to have these objective standards in their decision making, when in all reality they may be captured by their own biases or their own ideology. So, in an ideal world, let's assume that we didn't have this problem right now with accreditation. How would we ensure accreditation remains a reliable metric for the value of an institution?
Well, that's a great question. And it's something that we've been working on. And I think in our opinion, accreditation would measure outcomes. It wouldn't necessarily measure inputs. I think there was a great system, and I should know the name, but Mitch Daniel, when he was president of Purdue, he
Mhm.
created a really interesting accrediting system that was unique to him based on data. And it was very well received, and it's a good standard. And if you could create something like that for private schools and have metrics and measure certain things that parents care about, I think that's one way to do it. But I think the bigger issue and what we launched around was we said to the accreditors, look, you guys have done such a great job bringing DEI into these schools, but you've brought no viewpoint diversity. So how about you have every school as part of their accreditation process adopt their own version of a Chicago statement, right? Like put a stake in the ground, show that you really believe in diversity, but that would include viewpoint diversity.
Yeah.
And guess what they said to us?
Well, I'm guessing.
We got this. We're all about viewpoint diversity. We're all about critical thinking, blah, blah, blah. But we all know that that's not true.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Not in a good way either. But okay, so my last question before we go, and by the way, I appreciate your time, and this has been very insightful. There are some things I hear I didn't even know about accreditation that is very insightful. What advice do you have to offer to parents who wish to get involved in the fight to save education, whether it be with what your guys are doing or more generally?
That's a great question. I mean, you have to pick your battles, right? You have to figure out what issue is most important to you. Everybody can't do everything, but everybody can do something. And so, depending on the school, the problem you're facing, I think the first thing is just getting made aware of the situation, like learning as much as you can about the issue that concerns you, how you got there, what the resources are that will help you educate yourself, telling a friend, telling two friends, because this is really a collective action problem. If everybody just raised their hand and said, we've had enough, all of us, we want school to go back to being the place where everybody was educated equally. We taught the golden rule. Kids were friends. They weren't, pitted against each other. They weren't trying to learn that the country's evil. If everybody just stood up and did that, we'd be done, right? Like it's not
Yeah.
complicated what we're trying to solve for, but there is a cost. There's a cost that parents feel that they have if they speak up. And what we're saying is if we all do it together, the cost is less and we've all kicked open the door so you can start to speak up. So it's awareness, it's talking to your friends, raising awareness about the problems. And then there's a solution that's going to be different for every person in every school, right? Like what works for a small independent school in Boston might be different than like TJ, right? Or,
Yeah.
the Charlotte Latin School, because to your point, they are people, it's a people business. And depending on leadership, it's not working well. Now, I would highlight there are some great schools and some great leaders, and something you might want to put on your radar is the Deerfield Academy has a head of school named John Austin. And in response to all of this, and because he has been paying attention, Deerfield just launched a framework to basically do, I think, what every college is trying to do, which is to create an institution which is neutral politically, but encourages, heterodox thinking, critical thinking, viewpoint diversity, get the politics out of the classroom. And they've got a structure and documents around it and really a playbook for any school that has the courage to start to do this. But in the end, it's the leaders that are going to have to do it. A leader at the top of the school has to say, you know what? It's time we start educating children and not indoctrinating them. And here's how we're going to do it. And that's hard, but people are doing it. And I think more just need to lead and not follow.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. And so before we go, do you have any projects you would like to plug to our audience or anything you'd like to say as a closing statement?
Well, I just would like parents to know that we're here, parentsunite.org. We're in the process of revamping our website. So hopefully in a few weeks, it'll be new and improved. And we're really meant to be resources for parents who need help in private schools because the structures are different. And I think the solutions that private school parents have to implement to make the changes they need to make are complicated. So reach out to us. Every school is different, but our goal isn't to do the work for you, but it's to help you become empowered so you can do the work you need to do, to reach out to trustees, other parents, because lasting change has to come from within. It can't be top down. It really has to be bottom up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and everyone have a nice day.